Iran takes major step towards cutting ties with UN nuclear watchdog. Iran's supreme leader declares victory over Israel and the United States. And Gaza's health ministry reports 103 Palestinians killed and 219 wounded in the past 24 hours from Israel attacks. Good afternoon and welcome to Qnews. I'm Mark Summers. Iran has taken a major step forward to severing ties with the UN nuclear watchdog. The Guardian Council has approved a bill passed by Parliament to suspend cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency. The legislation, endorsed by a strong majority of 221 out of 290 lawmakers, paves the way for Iran to halt inspections and limit access to its nuclear facilities. This move comes amid heightened tensions following Israel's air campaign targeting Iranian nuclear sites and the IAEA's recent resolution accusing Tehran of breaching its non-proliferation commitments. The bill now awaits final enforcement procedures by Iran's Supreme National Security Council. Russia has urged Iran not to sever ties with the UN nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, following a major escalation in the region. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Moscow wants Tehran to continue its cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency. His remarks follow the Iranian parliament's approval of a bill to suspend that cooperation in response to joint US and Israeli strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. The bill still requires final ratification by Iran's Supreme National Security Council. Moscow, a key ally of Tehran, has expressed concern over the fallout from halting inspections and called for diplomatic engagement to prevent further escalation. The White House has reacted strongly to the recent leak of intelligence on the Iran strikes. White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt said the individual responsible for leaking the intelligence report on the outcome of the US strike against Iran's nuclear facilities should be imprisoned. Her comments follow the recent release of congressional intelligence findings, which revealed that the American strikes failed to achieve their core objectives. The leaked report contradicted earlier claims made by senior officials, sparking renewed scrutiny of the Biden administration's strategy and the effectiveness of the military operation. Iran's supreme leader has declared what he called a victory over both Israel and the United States. In a recorded message, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei claimed Iran had triumphed in the latest confrontation, saying the United Nations only entered the war to prevent what he described as the complete destruction of Israel. Khamenei asserted that Washington gained nothing from its involvement and dismissed claims of damage to Iran's nuclear program. He said President Donald Trump exaggerated the outcome of the strikes, insisting that Iran's nuclear sites remain intact and were not disrupted. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he will continue to coordinate closely with the US President Donald Trump following the ceasefire with Iran. In a post shared shortly after Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei delivered his first speech since the truce, Netanyahu said he remains committed to working with Trump to, quote, defeat our common enemies, free our hostages, and quickly expand the circle of peace. The message was accompanied by a photo of Netanyahu and Trump holding hands, underscoring the close ties between the two leaders amid ongoing regional tensions. So issues in the Middle East have escalated dramatically since June 13th, following the outbreak of a direct and dangerous conflict between Iran and Israel. What began with high-profile assassinations and targeted strikes has rapidly spiraled into a multi-front confrontation involving major regional and global powers. Here's a timeline of the key developments in this unfolding crisis with Rana El-Qassas.
The Iranian-Israeli conflict erupted on June 13, 2025, marked by high-profile assassinations, attacks on nuclear sites, and waves of Iranian drone and missile strikes. The escalation triggered regional turmoil and raised fears of a potential nuclear confrontation. Backed by covert Mossad operations, the assault prompted Iran to launch around 100 drones and missiles, causing major damage. The UN condemned the escalation, and the IAEA warned of serious risks from attacks on nuclear sites. By June 14, Israel intensified its offensive, striking Iran's defense ministry and Tehran's airport. In response, Iran launched attacks on Tel Aviv and Haifa. As a response to the military escalation, Iran announced the suspension of nuclear talks with the United States. Israel's unprovoked attacks on Iran was condemned by numerous nations, including Russia, China, Pakistan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. While G7 nations and several other European states voiced support to Israel, others adopted a more neutral stance, urging de-escalation. On June 16, Iranian missiles hit Tel Aviv and Haifa, killing 8 and injuring over 100. Israel said it intercepted most and destroyed a third of Iran's launchers. Iran later announced arrests linked to Israeli intelligence. The next wave of attacks came on June 17, when Iran claimed it had successfully struck Israel intelligence facilities, including Mossad Center. In response to the escalation, 21 Arab and Muslim nations endorsed an Egyptian-led collective statement condemning Israel's aggression against Iran. On June 18, Israel hit Iran's Hujayr missile complex and centrifuge sites in Tehran and Karaj, strikes later confirmed by the IAEA. By June 19, targeted Natanz and Arak, with the military ordered on June 20 to prepare for a prolonged campaign. In a dramatic escalation, President Trump announced on June 21st the U.S. bombers struck 3 major Iranian nuclear sites, claiming the operation had obliterated Iran's nuclear capabilities. By June 22, the U.S. clarified its goals. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the mission targeted Iran's nuclear program, not regime change. Officials called it a one-time strike, warning of strong retaliation if Iran attacks U.S. targets. On June 23, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Putin condemned the U.S. strikes as unjustified aggression, pledged diplomatic and humanitarian support, and offered to mediate, but withheld any military commitment. At the June 23 NATO summit in The Hague, Secretary General Mark Rutte said U.S. strikes on Iran did not violate international law. He urged Iran to meet its NPT obligations and accused Iran of aiding Russia in Ukraine by supplying kamikaze drones. Later that day, Iran launched a devastating missile strike on the U.S. El Udeid air base in Qatar after explosions over Doha. Qatar said its defenses intercepted the missiles, confirmed no casualties, and affirmed its right to respond. On June 23, President Trump announced a ceasefire between Iran and Israel, urging both sides to honor it and stressing the need for peace. The ceasefire took effect on June 24, with Trump insisting it will be permanent. As the conflict enters the new and uncertain phase, regional tensions remain high. With U.S. involvement and heavy losses on both sides, hopes for diplomacy have faded. The world watches with growing alarm, fearing a wider war with global repercussions.
Ronnie Alcasas there with that report. And now we go across to the newsroom where waiting for us is Reham. Reham.
Thank you so much, Mark. We're going to do the analysis right now with Reham Omar, the journalist and researcher, to tell us more about the updated situation right now on the ground. Thank you, sir, for joining us here on Qnews. Firstly, let's start off by asking, what are the immediate and long-term implications if Iran does officially suspend cooperation with the IAEA?
Greetings to you and your viewers. So, the region have taken relief following the ceasefire agreement between Iran and Israel, in addition to the state of calm in the region, after the concern of exchanging strikes against the nuclear reactor strikes like the 23, two of the leaks of the radiations. And in fact, the Iran, if they sued, will change the status of a Moroccan country by in the international law, as Iran should have standed to cooperate with the IAEA. If there are any objections, it should be within the cooperation system, but for Iran to come out of such a system and to withdraw itself from the agency and to cooperate with that will cause a very diplomatic problems, and will have great pressures upon Iran to get back to cooperate with the IAEA. But in fact, the IAEA is also has a question mark since the Iraqi war and the Libyan developments, along with Syria, with Bashar al-Assad. So therefore, Iran has the right in his rhetoric, but their attitude against such that need to be revised, as we shouldn't have come out of the system and to continue to cooperate with the IAEA, as this would lead to an outrage and new sanctions by the West upon Iran.
Well, sir, how could this decision impact the regional stability, especially given the recent Israeli and US strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, which probably led to the decision by the Iranians to, leave the IAEA as it's not a safeguard for them?
In fact, Israel nor America wouldn't have had to strike it or to resume its strikes upon Iran due to the suspension of Iran with the IAEA. But such a suspension would be interpreted as Iran is very much intending to execute its nuclear and ballistic program, and the whole world has already received the strikes and will have some sort of a pause to resume its process. But it is a premature. This war has come to end before to start again, before resuming Iran the operate its nuclear program within months or years. These matters are uncertain in general, but ultimately this war will ignite once again, sooner or later, because of Iran's desire to possess the nuclear weapons or to be as much as a folding country or to acquire a nuclear program.
Okay, now Russia is urging restraint. What role can Moscow realistically play in de-escalating the tensions or mediating between Tehran and the West now that they've decided to leave the IAEA?
I do not wish to marginalize Russia as it is a very powerful country in the region, but the crisis that Iran suffered leads to the nature of such a crisis between China and Russia, and the Russian was very weak, and there was also in 2025 that China is playing with the Western America, and therefore Russia is very much swamped in the Ukrainian-Russian war. Clearly, this matter undermined its influence and or even to make deals on the account of Pakistan and Iran. Russia is very much to make a deal on the account of Iran, but any deal with regard to any file, ultimately, I think that Russia isn't capable to provide anything to Iran in the upcoming period, and Iran will lead to more cooperation with China. Upon the ceasefire, the Minister of Defense of Iran and the first foreign minister out Iran went to China and didn't make a visit to Russia or even to any allied country to Iran. But Russia, as a result of the Russian-Ukrainian war, has been crippled. So it is very difficult for Russia to have a very realistic role in the Iranian nuclear file.
Well, the Iranians are claiming that the nuclear program remains intact, and the US and Israeli attacks didn't really affect them. Also, there have been leaks, intelligence leaks in the US that suggest that the operation has been ineffective, basically. How credible do you think these claims are in terms of how the nuclear program in Iran is doing so far after these strikes?
There is several parts within America in the institutional conflicts, security apparatus, intel community has 18 intelligence agency and objected Iran's strike. And I think that this report a statement that suggested that the strikes weren't that much affected, and such claims aren't realistic. I mean, a strike of such a force can't predict its effectiveness within hours or even within days following the strike. There are investigations and then collected information, and as the strikes wasn't against in a very small building, but it is a very complicated and technical matters that cannot be measured in a general framework. I think that the US is capable to put an end to this war if it is not, in fact, disrupted its project, regardless of any internal rift within America. This war wouldn't be ended without it having a great blow against Iran's nuclear program. Is it a very decisive or a temporary pause that we should talk about? But to say that it has no effect, it is something impossible.
Okay, from Cairo, that was Mr. Ihab Omar, a journalist and researcher. Thank you, sir, for joining us here on Q News. And now back to you, Mark, in our studio.
Thank you, Rehan. Rehan Morsi there in the newsroom. Now let's get the latest developments on Gaza. The Irish Prime Minister, Micheál Martin, has called the situation in Gaza humanly unacceptable and urged Europe to adopt a firm and unified stance. Speaking to reporters, Martin said Europe has so far failed to pressure Israel to halt its military campaign in Gaza, a shortcoming he said the European public finds incomprehensible. The Irish leader emphasised the need for urgent and decisive action, stressing that the scale of suffering in Gaza demands a moral response from the international community. The Ministry of Health in Gaza has reported that 103 Palestinians were killed and 219 others wounded in the past 24 hours due to ongoing Israeli attacks. According to the ministry, the total death toll since the Israeli assault began in October 2023 has now reached 56,259, with 132,458 others injured. The enclave remains under intense bombardment, with hospitals overwhelmed and humanitarian conditions continuing to deteriorate. The Israeli occupation government has announced it will block the entry of humanitarian aid into northern Gaza Strip. In a joint statement, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister instructed the Israeli army to present an operation plan within 48 hours to stop aid deliveries to northern Gaza. The decision comes amid Israeli claims that Hamas is seizing aid intended for civilians. The move is expected to deepen the humanitarian crisis in the area, where access to food, medicine and basic supplies is already severely limited. Turkish President Erdogan said that his country was not allowed and will not allow what is happening in the Gaza Strip to be forgotten. Speaking upon his return from the Netherlands, Erdogan said, "We have not and will not allow Gaza to be forgotten, even during times when global attention shifts to other regions."
Ardından da kalıcı sükunete giden yolu açacak her türlü gayreti takdirle karşılar ve samimiyetle destekleriz.
The Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs is urging the international community to intervene and stop what it calls the Israeli occupation's ongoing aggression against Gaza. In a statement, the ministry called for effective international mechanisms to halt the escalating violence and destruction. It warned that the continued military actions are deepening the devastation of what remains of Gaza's homes and infrastructure, while Palestinians, numbering over 2 million, remain without any safe refuge. The ministry also condemned the daily killings, holding Israel fully responsible for the humanitarian catastrophe in the enclave. And just before we go, let's recap the main headlines this afternoon. Iran takes a major step towards cutting ties with UN nuclear watchdog. Iran's supreme leader declares victory over Israel and the United States. And Gaza's health ministry reports 103 Palestinians killed and 219 wounded in the past 24 hours. That's all for now. Don't forget you can follow us on our social media platforms at Qnews EGY. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for In Depth next with Rana. Have a good afternoon.